to try to jump from one stage to the next and think that that's recovery is really fooling yourself into actually staying exactly where you are.
I don't want them to talk for an hour about all the chaos and then spend the last 10 minutes about their recovery. I want to talk about 10 minutes about their chaos and then talk for 50 minutes about how they're moving through that.
Hello and welcome to Brighton's Recovery Soapbox. My name is Kamrin Carver and I am the clinical director here at Brighton Recovery Center. Today I've brought in Patrick Rezac, a recovery coach with One Voice Recovery, to discuss a little bit about his journey, his process, and the services that he offers to the community. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. So I'm the executive director with One Voice Recovery. We're a newer nonprofit. We were founded in early 2016, but really registered with the state earlier in February of this year. So we've made a lot of progress since then. We have a syringe exchange harm reduction program. We've got HIV and hepatitis C prevention and care program where peer navigation is a huge part of our programming. We're really a peer-driven agency, and we augment what we do with clinical services or professional services, but we're a agency for peers and by peers, and we're trying to bring together a bunch of different elements to really serve people better. We have a Recovery Coach Academy that's accredited through the ICNRC, and then we have a Recovery Coach program, and we have sort of an advocacy group for people that want to advocate for better laws and for people with addiction and recovery and mental illness and HIV and hepatitis C issues. So that's what we do.
Well, that's a lot. And I'm excited to get into that a little bit more as well and let people hear how that shows up out there in the community. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We want to make our viewers aware of the fact that this recording is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. So make sure to look us up and rate us on those applications as well.
Nice.
Patrick, I want to let our viewers know kind of why we brought you in today, because I think it's really important to express that value that I see in you and the services that you're offering to the community. You know, I've seen you on the news, I've seen your Facebook page, I've seen the service that you're doing out there in the community, and it's inspired me. It's inspired me to bring you in and want you to be a part of our programming here at Brighton. And the things that I see you doing are selfless, and they are extremely aware of the needs that are around you. And I would like to just hear what got you to that point. I would love people to hear the story behind what brought you into this One Voice Recovery program that you've created for yourself and are now serving the community with.
Thank you for all of that. That's it's amazing. Thank you for that feedback. I've been in treatment 18 times in the last, the course of my addiction. And I've worked in treatment for several years, and nothing was working for me. And so the last time I was in treatment, I was in the aftercare planning phase of my treatment. And I realized that what I had been exposed to previously was not going to work for me. And so out of necessity for my own recovery and my own need, I decided to develop something that I felt like would be useful. And so the treatment center that I was in at the time allowed me to take time out of groups. I advocated for myself to not leave treatment without having a solid foundation for myself. And I demanded pretty much, maybe not so nice some of the time, that I be allowed to develop something for myself that was going to work. And so I just developed the One Voice Recovery Empowerment Group, and I solicited feedback from people that were in the program. I'm not anti 12 steps in any way. I've been in a 12-step program, a Scientology program. I've been in used MRT. I've been in a program where we focus was on rational recovery, smart recovery, faith-based modalities.
Can you tell us what MRT is for those people who don't know that?
MRT is moral recognition therapy, and it's a cognitive behavioral therapy approach. It was developed for people that are resistant to treatment. So there's a step-like process, but it's a peer-based, peer-led treatment community that's facilitated by a facilitator, but the peers basically will pass you through the steps.
Gotcha.
And the one thing that I recognized in all these programs I was in is they all have sort of core elements that are similar: being of service to other people, being honest about and accountable about your behavior and your decision making. What I loved about MRT was I got to look at my belief system. And so for me, once I looked at my belief system and started to recognize that I had some core beliefs that were self-defeating, like I deserve to be punished, I deserve HIV, I'm destined to die young, people only love me or value me if I'm sexual, those beliefs were fueling everything that I did, and created the lens which I looked at the world through. So I took really what I liked about all these different programs and just decided to integrate it into my own and forge my own path. And people would tell me, you're just not humble. You just need to go to me. And I did 90 meetings in 90 days. I called my sponsor every day. I worked the steps several times. But I've had 3 heart attacks. I'm HIV positive because of my addiction. I've had a pretty interesting life, and I'm lucky to be here. And so I knew that I had to have something that would work.
So what it sounds like is a lot like how some people view religion or spirituality, where the message is being communicated through different languages and different messengers per se, all over the world, and yet they're all speaking about the same thing. Did you kind of feel that when you were going through these different recovery programs?
Yeah, I think like even the Scientology program I went to, I was not a fan of, but it's so interesting how they go about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was resistant to it, but I definitely gained there. I definitely got I learned something about myself there. And I do think that we're all sort of teaching the same thing or learning the same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about community. It's about being connected to people. For me, it is. But I found myself, really, I wanted to know more, and I wanted to hear more than just call your sponsor, go to meetings, and rely on this one person to be your sounding board. I wanted to know, when do you disclose at work that you're in recovery or that you have an addiction? When do you consider yourself fully recovered or in full remission? How do you disclose to your kids? And what kind of quick questions are your kids asking you that are motivating you? How do you integrate other things into your recovery? I wanted to know more than what I was hearing, because that's what I needed. And so the treatment center that I was in allowed me to develop this and then facilitate it there before I left.
Oh, nice.
So that
it came before you even were discharged.
Yeah. And so then the response was so good that they asked me to keep coming back week after week to facilitate this group and fine tune it for their patients. And then
was it like a set curriculum with the answers to these questions as being different pods to the whole curriculum?
Yeah, well, so there's 5 weeks, and the first week there's questions that people ask, and all the questions have been developed by people. I mean, I developed sort of the first round of questions to set the tone and set the culture of the group, of the workshop, and then people have been adding to those questions, and they're multi-layered questions. I mean, and this is not a popular topic in treatment or recovery circles, but I touch on this in this group. Here's a question. Are you secretly wanting to have a sexual relationship in early recovery, but you're holding that secret because you don't want to be told you'll end up dead? What need are you trying to meet in pursuing this relationship? And how do you honor your growth, and the growth of the person you're interested in?
Wow, that's deep.
That's one of the questions.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
What led me out to my own relapse several times was maladaptive sexual relating with people. And I wasn't allowed to have that conversation because, just stick with the men, just stick with the women, just don't have sex for the first year. And I'm sorry, people are having sex. So how can we have a meaningful conversation about it, and where people can at least voice and then get to those core issues? What is it really you want to meet here? I want to be connected. Oh, okay then. If you want to be connected, is sex really the best way to go about that? And let's face it, people, when they come off opiates, get really horny.
Yeah, and not just opiates. I mean, addictions shift all the time. And just being able to understand how that looks behavior-wise, when you're so used to the substances, you don't really realize how that's showing up in other areas of your life.
Yeah. And if we can get people to, I know for me, once I was able to get to that core, like, oh, this is the need I'm trying to meet. And then if I know that I'm coming from a place of love in the interaction with the person, and if I can really assess like, oh, maybe this isn't going to be good for their recovery, so I'm going to really back off. I mean, if I can do that, then I'm at the right place to be engaging in a sexual relationship, whether it's one night stand or whether it's a meaningful 6-month or the rest of my life affair, but those are the questions I think that need to be answered, or at least be able to talk about. That's one question. So it's not like a question. It's not a group about sexual relating.
About sex. Okay, good to know.
No, that's one question. And then the second week is we bring in a motivational speaker, and I try to get. I mean, one of the core beliefs of this group is people are in recovery if they say they are, and all pathways are valid. And we're all recovering from something, basically. And so I try to bring people in that aren't just recovering from addiction, but from sexual assault, domestic violence, maybe the criminal justice system, people that are thriving and have gotten through those situations. Maybe substance use has been a part of their problem. Some it hasn't been, because we can all learn from like, well, how did you get from being, battered for 5 years? And now look at you, you're thriving. We all can learn from that.
Yeah, that's neat. And you say I go pull people in. So when you say I pull people in, what does that mean? I mean, I know there's obviously an outreach portion to what you're doing, but pulling them into what exactly? What is that framework?
In terms of this group or just my agency, One Voice Recovery?
Both. I mean, I think it's a really vague concept that people may think they understand, but I'd like you to clarify what that actually looks like for you.
Well, so for example, if somebody were to call me tomorrow and say, hey, we'd like you to come share your story at a 12-step fellowship, I know what to expect. I'm going to share about my experience, strength, and hope. And I'm going to talk about the steps and how they relate to my recovery. And I'm going to talk about where I've been, and I'm going to give some feedback to people, to newcomers, about what they should be thinking about possibly, or what has worked for me. So when I ask people to come and be a motivational speaker with One Voice, I send them a list of questions and I ask them to expand and push the envelope past what they're normally used to talking to. So what other things are you doing to manage your recovery? How do you keep yourself happy? Is happiness important in your recovery? How do you manage that? What concrete things have you done to still rebuild the damaged relationships that you've damaged in your life, beyond just whatever it may be in your core program? Like, I want people to touch on their core program. Like, I make an amends on step 9. How do you put that into practice though? How do you put that into practice? Like, on every Friday I call my father and I ask him how his day was. And if I'm homeless in my car, he doesn't need to know about it in that phone conversation. It's just all about him. That's a concrete thing that I'm doing to rebuild the relationship with him. Or I Skype my daughter every day, for an hour or whatever the case may be. And we don't talk, that's the time I set aside for her, regardless of what's going on in my life. Like, I feel like people need to hear that, because we're used to hearing the same things. And so, but what else are people doing? So they get a list of questions, and they come in and maybe talk about where they've been I don't want that to be the focal point. I don't want them to talk for an hour about all the chaos and then spend the last 10 minutes about their recovery. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about 10 minutes about their chaos, and then talk for 50 minutes about how they're moving through that. And what kinds of things are surfacing for you in your recovery that you didn't expect? For example, is starting a new relationship. What kind of things come up, and how do you move through that? And how have you had to use what you've learned in your recovery to navigate through that? Because I think that's what has been really beneficial for me to hear about. And I think people that are in treatment, as they're leaving treatment, I think that they could really learn from that.
Oh, of course. So you're saying that you have a place that you meet every week or every couple days? I mean, what is the structure for how people engage in your program?
Yeah, and so the One Voice Recovery Empowerment Group is held every Saturday at USERA, which is a recovery organization in Utah. And that's for anyone to come to. And then I facilitate this group in many different treatment centers, 5 every week currently. Nice. To introduce people that are in treatment, to encouraging them to empower themselves, to find a pathway that works for them, and maybe incorporate, like I incorporate 12 steps, I incorporate MRT, I incorporate some of everything that I learned, I incorporate a little bit of every program I've been exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people are in treatment and bringing them this format, then they can leave treatment and advocate for themselves and feel confident in knowing that I can do this. I don't have to pigeonhole myself to one thing or one philosophy or one program or one way of doing things. Yeah, I said that right.
Yeah, that's great. And from the part that I love most about what you do is that it's not just about the meetings either, that you do have a personal aspect, a one-on-one component to the program that you facilitate if people should want to take advantage of that as well. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm a recovery coach, and I'm a recovery coach trainer. So in Utah, there's sort of two tracks to be a peer specialist. You go through the U of U, and that has a mental health component. But I'm a recovery coach and I've been trained in specifically recovery-oriented, philosophy, I guess. Recovery coaching is all about understanding there are multiple pathways of recovery and helping people identify what will work for them and encouraging them to push. I just encourage people to shred the envelope, forget what you've been told, and follow your instinct and trust what you need, because at the end of the day, what you need is going to sustain you, not what other people tell you need. I mean, and then the other piece to that is being able to take in that information and assess it and listen to it and not be impulsive about it, and then make an informed decision about what you need. So there's a recovery coaching aspect. We have the Recovery Coach Academy. So we're getting ready to have that academy, facilitate that and present that academy in the first week of June. And then we have a syringe exchange program to interface with people that are currently still drug users that maybe want to move in whatever direction they want to move in. And then we have an HIV and hepatitis C prevention and care program. And my personal interest in that is that I'm HIV positive. And so that's part of my mission. That's what really brought me into the One Voice Recovery nonprofit.
And you've come to do that for us a few times too as well. And we've really appreciated your dedication and volunteer efforts there.
Thank you. That's part of my real drive. I've been educating people about HIV for 11 years. I have a daughter who's HIV negative. Her mom is HIV negative. So there's a lot people need to learn about HIV that they don't really know. Mm-hmm. And so I've created a presentation program that incorporates the basics of HIV prevention and testing, and then I tie in recovery empowerment and how taking care of your health is important and how that directly correlates to your recovery, and then what it looks like to thrive with HIV. So all three of those components are in the same presentation.
Yeah, that's great. I want to address a question that came up while you were talking about the recovery coach aspect and helping people find their own way. How do you basically mine out where somebody is and determine if they're just being obstinate and thinking that they know better than everyone around them, or if they're really accessing the internal wisdom that's going to guide them through to their recovery? Because I know as a therapist, what I see so often is people who are claiming to know what's best for them when in all actuality, they're just going rogue and making it look as if they're in recovery. And so that's been a struggle that I've seen play out time and time again. And I'm wondering how you address that in your setting.
Well, if people are, that comes up quite a bit. And here's the difference. And I can only try to model this for people, because what I was always told was, you're not humble. You're not following suggestions, and you're not doing what's being told, what's being asked of you. And that in and of itself means that you're just not ready to move ahead. Mm-hmm. Which couldn't have been further from the truth. I mean, so if people want to have a dialogue that feels like they're just being obstinate, or they're being oppositional, I sort of look at that like, well, if they're being oppositional, what's really driving that opposition? What is the belief about the situation that we're currently walking through that is driving the opposition. And I try to help people get to that belief, if possible. I mean, that's a process.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that matters. The belief system really, I believe drives everything. I mean, we could like try to get people to change their behavior and hope that thinking and look at our thinking errors and all of those things. But I am not able to see anything that I don't believe. And so if I believe that I deserve to be punished, I'm going to walk into every situation looking to validate that belief with my relationships that I manifest, with the interactions that I have with people. And so in terms of recovery coaching, I think the belief system is huge. And I think that all programs try to get to that on some level. Maybe they're not saying that. I mean, maybe we're not looking at it as belief systems, but I think that that's the goal.
I do too. And I think that's actually taking off in our community as well, the clinical setting. We are grabbing onto that and nurturing it as much as we can. At least in the circles that I run in, I see that most of us are finding that to be absolutely true and want to reach into people's lives and show them how much their beliefs are impacting their current realities. I know that me personally, I run a group on that once a week so that it's constantly reinforced and people get to hear it over and over and over. Because, at our basic core, when I think of spirituality, that's what I think about. Yes, we have religions that make it more than that and pump in rituals and make it kind of tailored to a specific demographic. However, when you look at it from the position of just pure belief, what do I believe I deserve? That is our spiritual core. Yeah. And I think if we can connect with that, it guides us from that moment forward. But so much of the substances and behavior addictions that we do find people struggling with cover that up and don't even give them access to that voice.
Absolutely.
So I think that's great. And as I'm talking about this and even listening to my own language, is that at all what inspired the name of your organization, One Voice?
One Voice Recovery?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of One Voice Recovery Empowerment Group. I wanted the group I wanted for my own recovery, when I was developing that, to focus on empowerment. I mean, what HIV has taught me is I don't identify as a label. Mm-hmm. I don't go up to somebody and say, hey, nice to meet you, I'm HIV, or I'm sleep apnea, or I'm, addiction is one of the only health problems that we just attach this stigmatizing label to. Maybe diabetics too. I'm a person, I have diabetes. I'm a person, I have seizures. I'm not seizure disorders. Addict is such a loaded label. And whenever I struggled, I felt this internal battle going on that, hi, I'm an addict and my name is Patrick. I could never get past that. And so I'm a person in recovery. Nice. I mean, that's just what it is. And I consider myself to be in full remission.
And how do you take that? So what I look at two very different worlds. Yeah. When AA was formed, the world that they lived in was unrecognizable for what we see today. Yeah. If you were to compare the two. What do you think has changed about our culture, our society, our norms that are making that position that you're talking about more and more popular? Whereas, when it was formulated, it was probably the only way people got well. But there's something happening now in the 21st century that's changing that. We're in the 21st century, right?
You're the 22nd? No.
I always say 20th and then I have to correct it. So
we're in the Renaissance period. Take off that battle hat.
Okay. And I don't know my centuries, so that's my thing. So I'm curious about how you look at it as far as what was happening back then that made it absolutely necessary and what's happening now that makes that not such a thing anymore.
Well, so I think for me, what I believe is, I think it's important, and I went through this process personally for a long time. Being powerless brought me into recovery. Empowerment got me out and keeps me out. And so I feel like the struggle that I had and why I was a chronic relapser among not dealing with my trauma was one piece. That label was another one. And focusing on being powerless, that I have no control over anything, that I have a lot of power. I can learn from my experiences. I can draw from all of the mistakes I made, and I can be grateful that I'm still alive because of the suffering that I've encountered in my life because of my addiction and trauma. And so all of those things bring me to a place of empowerment. And so standing up and owning a label I refuse to do it. I won't do it. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. Mm-hmm. I think that it's just because it feels good.
Yeah.
It feels good to identify in a different way. I mean, in the One Voice group, when we go around and we check in and we say, I'm Patrick, I'm in recovery from HIV disease, domestic violence, criminal thinking, and meth addiction. And we go around the room, I always hear the same thing. Eating disorders, sex addiction, porn addiction, criminal lifestyle, domestic violence, codependency, depression, PTSD. And
wow,
a lot of times,
that's got to be powerful.
And a lot of times people will mention that substances last. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, I'm here because I was a heroin addict.
Right, yeah. And
so then we get to understand that, like, it's not about the dope. It's about all these other areas and these other, so it's empowering.
Yeah, it sounds like that. And as I'm hearing you talk, what's coming to my mind is I'm thinking about, those struggling at the beginning stages of their recovery and kind of how they're going to maybe potentially hear your words right now. And what I see as a possibility is they're going to be in this stage of where they really do need to be powerless, that's going to get them into recovery. And what I want to make very clear is that taking the stance of where you're at right now and trying to say that that's where they are, if they're really not there, can actually be incredibly detrimental to their recovery because they're trying to put the cart before the horse. I'm empowered before I'm powerless.
Right.
Do you see that people try to do that? And
no, I haven't seen that occur,
okay.
actually, because the focal point isn't like we're not minimizing what brought you here either. Like, we are in a treatment center. We are in the stage 1 of recovery. The stages of recovery, which is first stage is stabilization. Mm-hmm. In stabilization, people are learning about addiction. They're learning to socialize in groups again. They are, assessing their life. They're detoxing, physically. Stage 2 is deepening. So they're having an emotional detox, and during that stage, their relationships are becoming a little bit more meaningful. And so they're in the stable and being powerless and there's a difference, I think, inherently with being resistant and being oppositional and wanting to do things your way because you're avoiding the work versus I'm forging my own path and I understand the differences. And I think for a lot of people, when they first get here in a treatment center or a treatment setting, they haven't been able to make that connection yet.
Right.
And so you have to have that first piece before you can get to the next piece. But being able to plant the seeds in people, I think, is what's important. And to be able to model for them what it looks like to show something a little different than maybe what they're used to seeing.
And that's what I appreciate about what's happening here is you're one of the group. You're not saying I'm above you or I'm better than you. You're just saying, hey, this is something that is available to everyone. And this is how it relates to me right now. What I really am hoping that people who are struggling with addiction right now are hearing from you is that this is a process and there are stages, and that to try to jump from one stage to the next and think that that's recovery is really fooling yourself into actually staying exactly where you are. Yeah. And I think the addiction is so brilliant. It's using our own thought patterns and our own processes against us. So it knows exactly what we're going to believe and buy into. Mm-hmm. And it can actually convince us that, hey, you're doing a very good thing right now. And if you just do what Patrick's doing right now, you'll be great. You don't need to go through those first couple steps. And I want that to be clear that you went through a very distinct process to get where you're at. And for somebody to just come into this their first day and think, I'm going to jump to where that is
Right.
a very unrealistic expectation.
Absolutely. I think the most important thing that I learned was that recovery is a process. It's not an event. And every time and that's one of the core beliefs in our group. We also have a working definition in that group. Recovery is a state of wellness that is better than the state you were in before. That is our definition of recovery, because at any given moment, we can decide to make a different choice, and we can assess what we're doing and always be better in the next couple minutes. But entering treatment, I always had an expectation that I would go to treatment, everything would be fine, and I would leave and I'd be fixed.
Yes.
And that was always the wrong thing to believe. And the other really kind of critical piece for me was dealing with my trauma. I've been in treatment 18 times, and I was always told, don't just deal with the substances. All that other stuff will resolve. And don't talk about that in process group, because we don't want to trigger someone else.
Oh, wow.
And so I never got to talk about the things that were haunting me.
That is really sad.
And so once I just demanded that these are the things that I'm here to work on. I've done this enough times to know that this is what's lacking. And so all of that recovery was a process. I mean, relapsing, sustaining some time in recovery and then relapsing again. I still learned from all those periods.
Because you were still in recovery.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a recovery date and there's a sobriety date, and that recovery date never changes.
No.
The date you decided to be better than you were yesterday, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I think so many people get caught up in their sobriety date, and they get the black and white thinking going on and the all or nothing. If I can't be in recovery for 60 days, I'm not going to be in it at all.
Yeah.
Instead of realizing, no, this is part of it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get caught up in the fact that, well, if I say that that relapse is a part of recovery, I'm then granting myself permission to relapse as often as I want. I think people get stuck in those little nuances. How did you find that you got out of that for yourself?
I stopped focusing on the amount of clean time I have, because first, that label implies that I'm dirty. So I don't use the word clean. I'm in recovery. So I don't focus on the time. What I do is I focus on the quality of day that I have. And if I can honestly assess at the end of the day that I didn't cut corners, that I did my absolute best, and that I did something to move ahead, and I give myself permission to make mistakes. And as soon as I become a perfectionist, I know that those negative beliefs are resurfacing, that I deserve to be punished, I am not worthy of being loved, I'm not good enough. So as soon as I start to notice that I'm either maybe sabotaging myself, or that I want to do things too good, then I know that I need to look at those beliefs and look at the situation and think, what is it about this situation that is manifesting this belief right now, and how do I knock it out of the corner? And usually what I do is I counter the belief with a polar opposite action that is in direct contradiction to what I'm believing at the moment. And then I don't know, for me, that creates a bridge between like suffering and happiness. And that works for me, Yeah. I don't know if that even answered your question.
Well, I think it does. I think, in essence, what we're saying is the way that I make sure that I don't give myself permission to relapse is by taking it one day at a time and making that day the best I can. Again, a lot of different programs state that in a similar way, but it works, and you found a way to make it work for you in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you look out at the people that you're working with and that are being drawn in to you, what would you say is similar about all of them? What do you see as the common threads? Why does somebody get drawn into your program versus like a 12-step or a SMART recovery or a Scientology program?
That's a really good question. I think because they like the focus being on empowerment and being open to possibilities and trying new things that maybe you haven't considered before, and being able to, I think people are really interested in having conversations about topics that are taboo or that really people are uncomfortable talking about.
Yes.
And I just find that all the time. I mean, I'm an open book when I talk to people about HIV. You know, people, when I go to do a presentation, I think the last 20 minutes is people always want to know, like, how did you have a baby? And she's fine. And I show the picture and she's like beautiful and she's thriving. And how does that happen? And how did you, you know, contract HIV? And I just will answer pretty much any question if it's helpful for other people. And that has created, I think, a level of comfort in people to talk about things that they don't really have the space to talk about. And I think that draws them into this whole process.
Yes, I agree. And this kind of speaks to the question earlier about, you know, what's different between the time when AA started, when it was absolutely essential for us to say, I am an addict or I'm an alcoholic, versus now where that necessarily doesn't have to be that way. And I think culturally, the changes that I'm seeing are what you're talking about right now. That as a culture and a society, we are much more open than ever before. Yeah. Every part of our lives are out there for the entire world to see. There isn't this shame and this secrecy, and they're not shoving us in back closets in meetings anymore. Like, it's mainstreamed. Everything that I'm going through is now out there, and I can hear my voice through thousands and millions of other people.
Yeah.
And so I'm not alone anymore. So that label of I'm an alcoholic, I'm an addict, doesn't have that same power that it used to. Because really how that served the people when it was created was to bring them out of the darkness, bring them out of the shadows, remind them every day I have this disease. But we don't need that as much anymore because of social media, because we see it everywhere. And because it's not this dark, shameful secret anymore, for the most part, it's become something that we accept widely in each other as well as in ourselves.
Yeah.
There are a few out there. I think sex addiction, pornography addiction are still deeply in the shadows. And I'd like to do future podcasts on that someday. But, you know, I think in general, we can speak to that piece of it and say that, you know, the empowerment you're feeling is a direct result of the time and age that you live in, as much as it is who you are. That has cultivated that inside of you and allowed you to create this space so that those who can be and are attracted to it have a place to go. Yeah. And I think that's a huge service that you offer and something that makes you very different from most of the other modalities that I've encountered.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why us at Brighton are very fortunate to have you be a part of what we're doing, because we hear all the time, we're taking you to 12-step meetings. We're running 12-step meetings, you know, for you and giving you opportunities to do that. But what if that doesn't work for me? What do I do then? And to have an outlet for that question is definitely something that we've benefited from and are receiving really deep and meaningful feedback from the patients as well. So that's been great to see.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to be here. I love it. It's interesting. The first time that the One Voice Recovery, I facilitate that group somewhere, I have to really give a lot of backstory and talk about why we're doing this the way we are. And usually people are resistant in the beginning, and then by the end, they love it. Mm-hmm. Not everybody can't please everybody. But here's the thing, like, I really hope to bring most to anybody here in your center. It's the worst feeling in the world when you're told that this is the best and the gold standard and the only thing that really is out there that works, and you don't identify with it. I was always left feeling sort of hopeless. Wow. Well, then what is there?
Yeah.
And
what's wrong with me?
And what's wrong with me? Like that I've got these, and for me, like I don't have character defects. Mm-hmm. I wasn't doing what worked for me. And so I really want to at least plant seeds in people to own their power and advocate for themselves if they don't feel like something is working. And I try to educate people to understand the difference between putting up walls and saying that it's not working for you because you don't really want to walk into the trauma that you experienced that brought you here.
Right.
Versus, no, it really, like, I'm willing to talk about these things, and I can model that by showing you that I can talk about being sexually assaulted. So I'm bringing that to the table. I'm showing you that I can do that, but also I still don't believe this is working for me. And so I want people to feel hope and be able to reach for all these things.
Yeah, and I think that feedback speaks to what you're saying too. People feel that from you, and they know that that's happening, and that's why you're reaching in and making that difference and that impact. And as I look at the path that you're describing and how people are responding to that, what I think is really important for anyone listening to understand about that is that it's very easy for us to say this isn't working and to make it about the thing versus about us.
Right.
And what am I not doing?
Right.
And that's a struggle, and it's not something anyone can just give you. It absolutely is something you have to work yourself through and say, is this really not me, or is this just not something I'm willing to do,
Right.
or somewhere I'm willing to go? Because 12 Steps is so structured, and it's so grounded, and it's got so much impact in the world right now that people are starting to view it almost as another institution that
Right.
is trying to strip them of that freedom that you're speaking of. And so understanding that, it's an amazing structure that's existed a long, long time. However, if you're not going to go to meetings over here and you say meetings don't work for me, well, why? Is it the fact that you want to isolate? Is the fact that you feel like you're different and separate and apart from, and that's feeding into it, so you're going to stay away from it? Or do you really need a different kind of program that takes you in a direction that doesn't have so much community involvement? And being willing to do that too. But if you're just going to take yourself out of one and not look into where that's going to go instead,
Right.
you can know which part of you is going to make that decision. It's going to be your addiction. It's not going to be you.
Yeah. And I think that's where the honesty piece is
Yes.
critical in any program. I mean, and this is what I love about the 12-step program, is that if you have the capacity to be honest, then you can recover.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to assess what we're talking about in a meaningful way with you, have that conversation, and be, and introspect about things to make that work.
Absolutely. And not only be honest with yourself, but be honest with the people you're working with. I think you and I have discussed this at length and understand very clearly that anything can be worked with, right? But the honesty piece, if you don't have that in place, what do you have?
Yeah.
And teaching people who have lived in a space for their entire lives to live in the darkness and the shadows and to hide pieces of them, to teach them even what honesty is or feels like or looks like, or how to have honesty in a relationship. I mean, that's like speaking a completely different language to people who have lived there their whole lives.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the main things that I see, or really I should keep this about what I experienced. I would have friends in recovery that, and I was feeling sort of dissatisfied with my level of the quality of my friendships.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember when I asked my sponsor at the time, I want to really find out what else there is, because I'm feeling dissatisfied with my relationships. I'm feeling like I don't want people to rely on me for their growth. I want it to be a reciprocal process where we bring equally to the table, and we are challenging each other, and maybe that's a fantasy, but I don't think so, because and so I was told, well, no, just do these things first. But then I isolated myself.
Yeah.
And once I become isolated and not connected to people, that's when I typically and historically have struggled. And so what I love about the 12-step program, and I have to reiterate this, I've encountered a little bit of pushback when you tell somebody there's something else that works, and it's almost like there's this internal projection of, and it makes them unsure, like, but you're shaking me to my core because this is what I know works. Yeah. And so I'm not trying to discount any program. In our groups, we have people that we're trying to bring people to the table that are recovering from all sorts of things. And so I'm not trying to discount 12-step programs. They work for a lot of people. They just don't work for everybody.
Well, and even people who 12-step programs work for can benefit from this one voice approach that you're coming from.
Certainly.
You don't have to let go of it to come and join in and be a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think people get so used to treating recovery as if it is a religion that they believe that they have to stick with the one true recovery path. without realizing that, hey, this may work in this ways, but I can get something over here too. And being okay with that.
Yeah.
Living more in the gray. I think most addicts are very uncomfortable living in the gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We want to be told and we want it to know. But we have this belief and expectation that this is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have that belief or expectation, then we limit ourselves.
Every time.
That's the empowerment piece.
Absolutely. So I'm curious if you have a message, if you could say what that core driving factor is in your heart that keeps you moving all day, every day, what that message is to the world, what you want people to hear from all of these valiant efforts that you're putting out there into everything that you do. What is that message that you're trying to get across?
That if I can recover, anybody can. I mean, I was very, very sick and out there. And I was homeless. I had, I ruined all my relationships. I've had 3 heart attacks. I'm HIV positive. I was almost murdered, stabbed in the arm. And I was sexually assaulted at gunpoint at 35 years old.
Wow.
By a motel owner and his son. I mean, so that was a crazy experience. And so all of those things just fed these beliefs that I had about myself, that what I needed and deserved and was worth in my life. And I see people all the day struggling with similar things and experiences. And really, if I can do it, anybody can. And so that's what drives me, like if I can have a kid and be HIV positive and she's beautiful and thriving, and then you can. It's possible. Like
Yeah.
it's not a life. It's just something that I manage. It's not something that defines me. And I don't think that addiction is it's the same thing. It does not define me at all, where I used to let it define me. And we're worth all of the everybody is worth happiness. And I'm just tired of seeing people treated poorly because they have an addiction or because they have other things that they are, dealing with, like depression or PTSD, rightfully so. I mean, why do we have experienced PTSD? Because we've experienced trauma.
Right.
So, rightfully so.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Why do we want to stigmatize that and discriminate against because of, or treat people differently because they deal with those things? And so that's really what drives me. I mean, and the service piece is huge. I mean, one thing that I think is powerful in all recovery modalities or philosophies is being of service to other people.
Yes.
And I think that in the One Voice format, one of the core beliefs is service work is crucial for the maintenance of our personal recovery, but our personal recovery should be the secondary gain. I mean, I think entering recovery, we have to just teach ourselves. We have to be selfless and we have to train ourselves. And the reason that the payoff is that I'm going to help you because I'm going to maintain my recovery, but that's a selfish motive.
Right.
In and of itself. And I think it's important to engage in and begin your recovery process. But I think as we evolve and grow up and mature in our recovery, we start to realize, we come to understand and we learn that we just help because it's the right thing to do. And there's a natural consequence, which is we feel good about ourselves. It feels good. It builds our self-confidence and we like ourselves more and we love ourselves more. And if we love ourselves more, it's impossible to do things to ourselves that are demeaning. Or abusive. I mean, so that's the payoff, but that's not the driving factor.
Well, and I also think it's just what naturally happens. You don't have to work at it. You don't have to say, oh my gosh, I've never loved myself. How am I ever going to love myself? Yeah. It's just like you said, secondary gain to what you're already doing. If you're doing all of that in a way that's authentic and real and genuine, you are going to start to like yourself and eventually love yourself. And that doesn't become the goal. It just becomes the outcome.
Yeah.
And I think that distinction is really important and one that a lot of people miss. But it sounds like you've definitely nailed.
It's helped me.
Yeah, definitely. You've succeeded well.
Thank you.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for being with us here today. This has been an amazing experience. I've enjoyed every bit of it. I thought I knew you before going into this interview, but I've definitely learned a lot more and just appreciate you at an entirely new level. So I appreciate your time. I know that coming out here is a bit of a jaunt, and it's something that I hope that the people who have been listening to will benefit from as much as we have here today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I want people to know where they can find you as well. So if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing how people can reach out and get a hold of you, that would be really helpful, I think.
Absolutely. You can reach us on the web, onevoicerecovery.org. We're on Facebook as well. The One Voice Recovery Empowerment Group has a Facebook page. You can join that and see where we're, our Facebook page, there's an events page. You can see where we're offering groups if they're private or for the public. And our phone number is listed on that as well. So yeah, that's how you can reach us. Also through some of our community partners, like with Brighton Recovery Center and other people we work with, we show up on their pages and there's cross marketing and things like that. So
neat. That's great. And for anyone interested in listening to this or passing along this podcast today, I want you to know that you can do that through iTunes, Stitchers, and Google Play. So make sure to head out to those applications and rate us and spread the word. I think this definitely needs to get out to the world.